attended the 30th British-Irish Council Summit in Guernsey on the 22nd of June, hosted by Chief Minister Gavin St Pierre. I was accompanied by the Minister for Housing, Planning and Local Government, Owen Murphy. The British-Irish Council is an institution created under the Good Friday Agreement and brings together representatives of 8 member administrations: the British and Irish governments, the devolved institutions in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and the governments of Isle of Man, Jersey and Guernsey. It works to promote harmonious and mutually beneficial relationships across the islands and provides an opportunity to consult, cooperate and exchange views on common policies or in areas of shared interest. The discussion at the summit covered key political developments for administration since the previous summit in November. The discussion focused largely on the implications of Brexit, particularly for relationships across the islands. The Council also discussed the current political situation in Northern Ireland, and I restated my regret that Northern Ireland, until the executive is restored, is without political representation in this important forum. The Council also endorsed plans for a future programme of work proposed by Environment Ministers and agreed to a new area of work on social enterprise. Mr Murphy took part in a thematic discussion on the issues that collectively impact on the marine environment of these islands. David Lidington MP, Cabinet Office Minister, and Karen Bradley MP, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, attended for the British Government, along with First Ministers from Scotland and Wales and Heads of Administration from Isle of Man, Jersey and Guernsey. I took the opportunity to have bilateral meetings with the Welsh First Minister, Carwyn Jones, and the Scottish First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, and in both meetings we exchanged views and perspectives on issues of mutual interest and continued cooperation, with discussions focusing mainly on Brexit and its impacts on business and citizens, on developments in Westminster and in Brussels. In my meeting with First Minister Jones, I confirmed our intention to reopen our consulate in Cardiff as part of our Global Ireland 2025 plan. I also had brief discussions with David Lidington and Karen Bradley on Brexit and on the absence of an agreement between the parties on re-establishing a Northern Ireland executive. I underscored the importance of the restoration of the institutions in the context of the full implementation of the agreement and undertook to continue to work with the British Government to support the Northern parties to achieve this outcome.
Taoiseach, Deputy Joan Burton, please.
Thank you. First of all, I just note that the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, wasn't at the summit. I wonder, in his conversations with Mrs May, has the Taoiseach suggested to her that her attendance at the British-Irish Council could in fact be valuable. Valuable particularly in relation to the island of Ireland, north and south, but also valuable in the context of both Scotland and Wales, who were represented by their First Ministers, to actually understand the difficulties and likely impacts of a difficult Brexit, not just for Ireland, north and south, but indeed for Scotland and for Wales as well. And in that context, I note the Taoiseach had discussions with the Northern Ireland Secretary and also with Mr Lidington as well. But what I want to ask the Taoiseach, having met Mrs May at the meeting in Salzburg last week, do you now feel that in fact the backstop is becoming more illusory, as there appears to be very little chance of the current British government actually reaching a deal either in relation to the single market or in relation to the customs union? And indeed, we also have issues arising from the Belfast Agreement in relation to personal freedoms and rights and the rule of law, particularly in Northern Ireland. So I want to ask the Taoiseach, what is his assessment now of where we stand in terms of potentially very difficult Brexit? We don't have any great detail from this government of how they plan to protect Irish businesses
Thank you, Deputy.
and Irish situations in the view of a difficult Brexit. Very little detailed information. I know there are various schemes for grants and so on for businesses, but very little real preparation has been done by the government in relation to the details of how it's going to impact on businesses south of the border and north.
Taoiseach, in July you said the talks in respect of the northern institutions and the re-establishment of them would reconvene in the autumn. I'd like you to set out for us if that is still your proposed timetable. I would like to ask you what you propose to do, what action you propose to take in respect of the rights that are still outstanding in the north. I refer to marriage equality, I refer to Oireachtas na Gaeilge, I refer to the struggle that so many families still have to secure inquests. As you know, for many of these families, these are sagas that are decades long. And as you know, it is a struggle that's not defined by or confined to orange or green. This is a dilemma that is right across society. You will know, of course, Taoiseach, that I have challenged many times Mrs May on the ethic or the morality of withholding inquests from families. It is, after all, a basic democratic norm and a very, very basic right for anybody who purports to have any interest in the rule of law. Last February, we achieved an accommodation, not perfectly formed, to the nationalist or Republican eye, but an accommodation nonetheless that we believed had a sufficiency to allow us to proceed to re-establish the executive. The DUP walked away from that. The DUP's toxic relationship with Theresa May has given them safe haven at Westminster. No incentive, no pressure has been exerted to encourage the DUP to do the things that are necessary to re-establish the institutions. And now, of course, we see the drama of RHI unfold and the absolute neurotic behaviour of so many within the DUP leadership. I have to say I wouldn't give you much hope for the future. All of that said, we need to move forward. As the previous speaker has set out, the Brexit dilemma now reaches its crescendo, and the jeopardy is very, very great for Ireland North and South. So tell us, Taoiseach, about this proposed timetable for talks. What has Karen Bradley told you? Because she's told us, damn all. And could you set out your state of knowledge or your plans in that regard?
Now, we can take two brief supplementaries, and they need to be brief or else the Taoiseach won't have time to answer. Deputy Calleary and Deputy Boyd Barrett.
Taoiseach, that meeting in Guernsey was held up by the Taoiseach in particular as possibly a game changer or a major meeting in the context of the continued vacuum around the Northern Ireland executive. Yet the British Prime Minister didn't even turn up to it. And the strength of the British-Irish Council over the years was the full participation and the full sharing of information around those tables amongst all the Taoiseach and the Prime Ministers on the island. So, what plans have you to reinvigorate the British-Irish Council, and what plans have you to inject urgency? I completely accept the focus of relation with London at the moment is focused on Brexit, but there needs to be an urgency injected into addressing the vacuum. And with due respect, Deputy McDonald, you're not necessarily an impartial observer either. Your party is part of that as well and needs to come forward with solutions to address this vacuum, because out of a vacuum, we go back to a situation that we had. But finally, Taoiseach, in the context of Brexit, can you give your reaction to the speech delivered this afternoon by Keir Starmer at the British Labour Conference, where he said Labour will be unlikely to vote for any deal in the UK Parliament if such a deal is arrived at, once again throwing huge uncertainty into the Brexit process?
Taoiseach, it goes without saying that we can't trust the Tory right and the Tory Brexiteers in terms of the consequences and the negotiations around the British exit for obvious reasons. But something we've always said is we don't necessarily trust the European Union to look after Irish interests. on the issue of the border if those negotiations don't go well. Now, you've always said that we won't accept any hard border, and those reassurances are welcome, but is there a contradiction between talking about recruiting a whole number of customs officials and saying that we won't accept a hard border? Because that would seem to suggest that we are preparing to actually put up barriers, trade barriers or customs barriers. And can you give us an assurance that those customs officials will not be deployed at any point along the north-south border, regardless of what happens or what deals do or don't happen between Europe and Britain? Because while I don't trust the Tory Brexiteers, I don't trust the European Union not to insist on a border to protect the single market, and that would be completely unacceptable. So can you give us that assurance that the Irish state, will not be deploying customs officials along the border between the north and south of this country?
Taoiseach, we're just about 4 minutes now for a response.
Thanks again, Corla. Prime Minister May didn't attend the British-Irish Council, and I understand she never has. Former Prime Minister Cameron did attend one, I think, during his 6-year period as Prime Minister, and the practice has been since the early days of the Good Friday Agreement that the Taoiseach attends for Ireland, but a Secretary of State attends for the UK Government. I haven't spoken to Prime Minister May about her attending the BIC, but I have spoken to her about the need for a new mechanism by which the British Government and the Irish Government can engage on a structured basis. We do that very well at the moment because we're both in the European Union. Every minister and their UK counterparts attends EU councils 3 and 4 times a year, and it's always a good opportunity for bilaterals. So we're going to go from a situation whereby we all see each other at least 4 times a year in Brussels to a situation whereby we don't, and that will happen from March next year. So I have spoken to her about how we might deal with that and have a structured mechanism by which the two sovereign governments, the British government and the Irish government, could meet more regularly. And perhaps the mechanism for doing that isn't the BIC, it's the BIIGC, the British-Irish Governmental Conference, which can meet in different formats. And the Good Friday Agreement, even though it did not foresee it at the time, may have been more foreseeing than any of us could have believed. And perhaps that mechanism for East-West cooperation between the two sovereign governments could be reinvigorated and used as an opportunity for us to engage Minister to Minister, Prime Minister to Prime Minister on a structured basis after the UK leaves the European Union in March. In terms of the backstop or the protocol in Ireland and Northern Ireland, Prime Minister May once again restated her commitment to having a legally operable backstop as part of the withdrawal agreement. And the EU27 again in Salzburg gave us our full solidarity behind Ireland and restated our position that there won't be a withdrawal agreement at all. No transition period for the UK if there isn't an Irish protocol, a legally operable Irish backstop as part of that. I do think we will get there. I think we'll get there in November because nobody wants us to end up in a no-deal scenario. The damage for the UK would be immense. The damage for Ireland would also be immense, and it would have a serious impact on other countries like Belgium and Holland and France and Denmark. So I believe we will get there in November, but we are in uncharted territory. I've sought a lot of advice on this over the past couple of weeks, and particularly over the summer. Met a lot of wise old heads who know Europe and know British politics and know Northern Ireland and all the issues around it. And I came away from those meetings with the advice that it's uncharted territory and unpredictable, and do your best. And I think that was probably the best advice I could have got. But we'll have to stay engaged, we'll have to stay vigilant, and we will in the period ahead. In terms of talks on getting the Northern Ireland Executive and Assembly back up and running, the Taoiseach and the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland are in touch about new talks. There has been some suggestions around the possibility of having an independent chair for these talks, but I understand that particular proposal hasn't found favour with the DUP, and it won't be possible to form an executive in Northern Ireland unless the DUP and Sinn Féin can come together and come to an agreement. And Northern Ireland now holds the international record, unfortunately, of failing to form a government, which is, I think, a real shame. I do think clarity around Brexit could help. So perhaps if by the October summit or the November summit, if there is one, we're in a position to have a roadmap as to how Brexit's going to work, what the new relationships are going to look like, we might be in a better position then to bring the parties together again, and certainly government stands ready to do exactly that. I didn't have a chance to hear Sir Keir Starmer's speech, so I can't really comment on it, but it is the case that any withdrawal agreement will have to be ratified by both Westminster and the European Parliament. While we may assume that because something is agreed at European Council and with the UK that it will go through both parliaments, we shouldn't actually assume it. And of course there is a possibility that the heads of government and the European Council and the UK will come to a decision in October, November. We may find that it runs into ratification problems in Westminster or the European Parliament, and we're just going to have to manage that and see how it develops.
Thank you, Taoiseach.
Just Deputy Boyd Barrett's question. We're recruiting customs and revenue officers for the ports and airports, particularly Dublin Airport, Dublin Port and Rossall Airport. Bear in mind, when the UK does leave the European Union, whether it's March next year or at the end of the transition period at the start of 2021, they'll be leaving the single market as well. So there will be changes. The rules of trade, the trading relationship between Britain and Ireland will not be as it is now. So we do need to make provision for those changes, and that's what we're doing. But we won't be applying any of them along the land border of Northern Ireland.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Question number 4, please.